Good afternoon again. It's me again, Tamuku, your tutor for English Didactics and Learner Support. Those who are taking A, CSE, DAS, DE, and DSE combined together. This is our content-based contact session for all our exams next year, that is 2019, May, August, and November 2019. And there you see my number on the screen. Okay. Our session will be talking about more than six the content ends. We'll talk about the ends, the teaching methods, assessment, reading, writing, speaking and listening, and then before we talk about the ends, we will talk about the assessment, formative and continuous assessment, and then in reading we'll talk about how do you motivate learners to read, and how do we encourage slow learners to read. And writing, we'll also talk about how do you motivate learners to read well as well. And then listening and speaking. You see in your guide, listening appears after speaking. So it's not a very big problem. You can say speaking and listening, the same thing as well. Okay. Now, the title for this module is English Didactics and Learner Support. Now, basically, this module prepares you as students. This module talks about the teaching part of English, how to teach reading, writing, listening, speaking, basically. So didactics has to do with the teaching methods in the English language. That's why you see English Didactics and Learner Support. How do you support learners in all the areas I mentioned here? How do you support your learners in writing, in speaking, in reading, and listening? How do we do that? Okay. Now, of course, our ends. This module will enable us as students to develop theoretical understanding, values, and competencies of teaching English, as I said. It deals with how to teach English. It will develop you to develop your values and your understanding of how to teach English with so many areas I mentioned here. And then you must also be able to explain the methods, learner support, and other key issues regarding facilitation and learning of grammar, listening and speaking, reading and writing, understanding and speaking, and then the novels, dramas, poetry, and lastly assessment. How do you do your assessment in English as a subject? Okay. Now let's start with teaching methods. We will not waste much time here because we all know what learner-centered method is. Learner-centered teaching, that's where you involve your learners in the teaching profession. In your teaching classes. That is where you value your learners' knowledge, prior knowledge in their teaching, as opposed to traditional teaching. You are a facilitator, and then you allow your learners to fit in the new knowledge they have in their learning. There are so many areas you see on our notes there. The pace of learning is an individual learner. That is learner-centered approach. And then the direct method. The direct teaching method, it is called the traditional way of teaching, where the teacher is the main source of knowledge. The teacher is regarded as the only person who transfers knowledge from the teacher to the learner. And then the learner's prior knowledge is not taken into consideration. So directly These are the principles of the direct teaching methods: classroom instructions, everyday vocabulary, oral communications. The grammar is taught inductively. A new teaching point introduced orally. And then concepts are taught through demonstrations, pictures, and etc. The emphasis is on correct pronunciation. Students in the direct teaching method approach, they speak at least 80% of the lesson. And the most important aspect of the direct teaching method is that students are taught to ask questions. They are taught to ask questions and answer them. Those are the principles of the direct teaching method. And then the advantages of the direct teaching methods. One of the most important one is that the curriculum can be covered in a very short time, apart from the ones mentioned here. Of course, as I said earlier on, the teacher is the one in control of the class, of the teaching. Is the one regarded as the main source of wisdom, the main source of knowledge, imparting knowledge from the textbook to students. Okay. Now the disadvantages of the direct method. This is what we call the traditional way of teaching. It is based on old learning theories, and learners do not have a sense of the overall purpose of the simple steps. And the most important disadvantage here is teachers cannot assess prior knowledge of learners because they will be unaware why certain students cannot learn. Because you as the teacher, you are the only source of knowledge. You are seen as the only source of knowledge giving to students. And then memorization, that is retention of how to solve problems, is very low. And then learners who have other than verbal intelligence, they usually fail. You see there are a number of disadvantages. We can go through them in your guides for the exam. And then the difference between behaviorism and constructivism. I came across a number of teachers here. These two terms here, if you decide to study teaching at any university, any college, even outside Namibia, you will come across these two terms, behaviorism and constructivism. As teachers, we must know these terms. Now, in simple terms, to make it easier for you, behaviorism is what we call the direct teaching methods, the traditional way of teaching, the direct teaching method, behaviorism. It says here, it is founded on the premise that learners can be taught by just feeding them. As I said earlier on, a method where a teacher is the only source of knowledge. That is what we call behaviorism. And then constructivism is, let me say, another word for learner-centered teaching. That is where it is based, where learners, the teacher believes that learners possess pre-knowledge and that they also need this pre-knowledge in their learning, in their new learning. It is the foundation of learner-centered education, as simple as such. Behaviorism and constructivism. From the verb construct. So constructivism believes that learners construct, they add on their already existing knowledge. That is constructivism. Okay. And then assessment. Assessment is very important as a teacher because you will be assessing your learners from time to time. The definition, that is the act of making judgment about something, the evaluation or estimation of the nature, quality, or ability of someone. That is the definition. Now the purpose, of course, what is the purpose of assessment? That is to give feedback about strong and weak points and to suggest areas of improvement, to maybe inform parents of their children's progress, or to encourage reward and support. Or if you want to develop new teaching methods, you must assess so that you know if your competencies are achieved or not. That is the purpose. And then we have three forms of assessment. Now, I want to start with continuous assessment so that you know the three of them. We have formative assessment, summative, and continuous. Now, continuous assessment, it is done either on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, continuously. So marks are awarded for competencies in the syllabus, which may not all be assessed during a formal written exam. These marks are added on our promotional mark schedules to the results of the summative assessment for promotional purposes. So if you give classworks every week, day in, day out, that's what we call continuous assessment. It can either be done orally or verbally. That is continuously, on a continuous basis. Now the other two, we have formative assessment. This one is a form of assessment where you assess learners over a period of time, either a year or 2 years, for example in secondary school. And then the learners are assessed at the end of a certain period. They learn to evaluate their own performance on a regular basis. Now the learners' skills are continuously addressed in specific way, that not on a continuously basis, but at the end of a long period of time. That is formative assessment. You will see the notes in your guides. And then summative. Summative assessment is done at the end of a learning area. For example, at the end of your grade 10, you write your final exam. At the end of a grade 12, you write your final exam. That is what we call summative assessment. That's the difference between the three areas: formative assessment, summative, and continuous assessment. When you read through your prescribed textbooks, you'll be given a number of examples on continuous assessment, summative, and formative assessment. Okay. Now, in general, you also go through the characters of good assessment, that is efficiency, significance, the purpose and impact, validity and fairness, reliability. It ends there. So you go through them as well. They are very important for your exams. You will be asked, what are the characters of good assessment? And then you mention them as they appear in your guides and the other prescribed textbooks. Okay. Now, when you give a test to your students, your learners, what is the importance of reflecting on examination or test results? Now, assessment is a powerful tool for the teacher and for education at large. Now, assessment should be used to establish which competencies your learners have not mastered, and which ones they did. It will help you to do the planning, which objectives your learners did not get through or grasp, and which ones they did, so you know how to do your planning for you to improve your teaching and learning. You look at the symbols, the way they are distributed, and then you analyze whether the low average are more than the above average, and what do you do with the low average, and what do you do with the below average, and what do you do with the above average. You decide. So the importance of reflecting on the examination is very important, because you gather your marks, then you do your master. You can also reteach to improve the results. Okay. And then reading. In English, reading is also one of the areas we have which are problematic. You will be asked, what are the causes of reading problems in learners? Why do some learners have problems in reading? Just reading, simple reading. So you go through them, they are already there. On top of this we have here, you also add, you read through the notes in other prescribed textbooks on the causes of reading. Okay. And then we have activities which can be employed to motivate learners to read more. For example, if you are at a school where you have a big library, you can set aside a reading space in your class or in the library for learners to sit and read. You encourage your learners to go to the library to read for enjoyment or to borrow books for reading on their own. In other words, we encourage a reading culture. Then you also find your learners' interest and provide reading material that will interest them. Don't bring boring books. So you must know what are your learners interested in reading, and then you know which ones to give them. Okay, you provide short stories. You challenge them with high-level reading materials, like newspapers, for example, or encyclopedias. I know this is very difficult because these days people don't bother reading books or go to libraries. People can only go to libraries if they have assignments to do. In any case, they'll Google, they'll do whatever on their phones. But at school, please, you must know how to employ or to motivate your learners to read more. Okay. Now, how do you assist, apart from reading, the spelling part of it, how you as a teacher, as students, future teachers, can you assist learners to improve their spelling? You stick to difficult spelling words. You stick difficult spelling words on the mirror, and then you know which ones are difficult, and then they spell them every time and then. And then there's what we call spell check. You pay attention as to how a word should be spelled. Reading also improves spelling. You read more. You create doodles. When reading magazines or newspapers, you highlight unfamiliar words. This helps increase your vocabulary. And you keep a spelling journal. You use a spelling software program. I hope you have seen this one. It's a very nice one, and it's very fun as well. So you break your syllables you break your words into syllables. Like syllables are minimum sounds so that you know. Like my name, Tamuku. The name has 3 syllables. T-A, that is ta, and M-U, mu, and then K-U, ku. So you have 3 syllables. When you break words into syllables, it's easier for you to pronounce them and spell them the way they are. Okay. And then writing. You will be asked what are the problems that learners may experience with writing tasks. Repetition, the overuse of adjectives, overused words, slang language, clinches, redundancy, verbosity, unnecessary big words, and ambiguity and numerals. So those are the aspects of writing. Problems that learners may experience with writing tasks. You go through them for the exam. Remember, it's in April, August, and November exam. Okay. Now, how do you motivate your learners to write well? So you have a number of ideas there. One of them is to help learners find personal meaning and value in the material. When you make your learners believe in themselves, then obviously, automatically, you will motivate them to write well. Some learners only need a bit of encouragement, someone who believes in them, so they know they are good in A, B, C, D. Then they can do well in writing. You must also, as a teacher, learn to give frequent feedback. You don't give work today, you give your feedback after a month or so. If you give frequent feedbacks, your learners will be encouraged, and then they would want to see how much they perform and how they performed. So if you give feedback, they will be encouraged. And you also create a very creative atmosphere where they are open and positive, where they feel they are valued members of the class or of the school. And then speaking and listening, ways of motivating learners to improve their English listening and speaking skills. You encourage them to take their time in learning the language. The more time spent in reading, listening, writing, and speaking, the better chances for them to succeed. And then you stay in touch with the language. You make efforts to listen to the language being spoken, and be selective of what you listen to, but listen as often as you can. You can also encourage them to listen to one another as well, not to listen to you as a teacher. So you read a lot and focus on learning new vocabulary every day. You read a lot. The more you read, the better your use of language will become. You can also keep a notebook to write down new words and use a dictionary to assist with new word meaning. All these are just short notes given to you. Everything is discussed in full in your guides and other prescribed textbooks. I've seen last year that when I was marking all your assignments and the exam, especially the assignments, when you are given an assignment to write, next year in April, August and November, you are given an assignment, you can visit any library. Don't rely on the notes you have in your guidelines. Go through other prescribed textbooks. A definition, one definition, like for example, if you are asked, what is a report? A report is defined differently by different writers and different dictionaries. You can bring up 10 definitions. Now you people just bring one definition from the guide. It means you don't have time to go through to consult other prescribed textbooks. Whatever we talk here, they are just content-based sessions for your exam. But in detail, you can go an extra mile for your academic life. Okay, so there we have them. Now, the motivation for listening and speaking. There are different types of motivation. We have internal one and then external one. This one is self-explanatory. The internal drive that a person has to acquire a competence in the language, that is internal. And then the opposite, the outside one, is the external one. And then on top of that, we have integrative and instrumental motivation. So you also add them there. And then that is the end of our presentation. Thank you once again for this presentation. As I said earlier on, please don't rely on these notes. You go an extra mile, read through all your prescribed textbooks, and then you add on your ready notes you have. So thank you so much for this one once again.